Hi, this is Nathan All, and in one of my previous videos, I discussed the process for scanning the Jim Henson, getting my initial scan for the Jim Henson statue, and now I'm going to describe how I actually processed these JPEG files and turned it into a 3D point cloud. So right here, as you can see, I have my images, and this is the JPEG files that I was able to scan, and as you can see, the laser picks up pretty well on all of Jim Henson's features along with the bench. I don't quite get the best scan of Kermit in this initial scan, but that's what I'm gonna use a different angle and location for. But the overall goal of this scan ended up being just making sure I got the shape of Jim Henson on the bench. And there's a couple things that I want to point out from these JPEG files that I considered in my process. So first, I had to consider a lot of this background right here um, created a lot of noise when I was initially um, running my cloud, and it didn't turn out looking very well because I was basing my um, to transfer these to my Python script. I ran it through a color picker to figure out which HSV values I wanted to be my lower and upper bound, and I kind of based it off of these images and was able to get a good reading based off of these. But then I realized that it wasn't working well necessarily for these parts of the statue. And so what I did in my code, which I'll refer later, is I blacked out a lot of this in each image because it was one, it's not the laser never reaches this part because I knew the distance would never be far enough for it to reach all the way over here. And so if I just blacked out this, then I would be able to eliminate all this noise and it wouldn't have any effect on any of my other images if I just blacked out this area over here. So after running the color picker, finding the upper and lower bounds and fixing these issues, I emailed the images to myself. And one other thing that I ran into is because I had already run a different scan on a different object in my apartment, I had similar image names. So I had to make sure that instead of having like 312 in parentheses one because it was the same name of a file, I had to eliminate all those because that also messed with my code. But once I got those issues resolved, I have the color lower and color upper. And one thing that I noticed was that my code was actually leading to a flipped. My cloud was flipped across the x-axis, so it was pretty much a simple fix of just creating a PCX flipped equals negative PCX and then graphing that instead so I could get it oriented how I wanted to get it oriented. And so after I have all my JPEG files in my computer, I put them in a folder called Kermit and then created a text file by running this code. And as you can see, it picks up on all the JPEG files and then it runs through them one by one. So, and then it prints out the angle as well. And this is a lengthy process, so I'm going to pause the video here and come back when it's done. So after running my script in Python, here's my 3D point cloud, which also creates a text file, which records all of these points, which I'm then going to run through MATLAB. But looking at this originally, as you can see, the Z label, most of them are negative as my scanner was pointed downward for most of the statue, but some of it was just towards his like head was a little bit above my scanner, and the X label is lined up and the Y label is lined up as the distance gets further, the Y axis values increase. And as you can see here, it'll be more clear in the MATLAB script, but you can see kind of a general trace of the Jim Henson statue and the bench next to him and a little bit of the ground. And so now I'm going to run it after it takes this text file. I'm then going to run it in MATLAB. And so so the MATLAB file is then going to take this test results.txt. And again, I flip the X label in the MATLAB code as well to make sure that it's oriented how I want it to be oriented. And so I'm going to run this script. And again, it takes a little bit, so I'm gonna resume the video once it's done. So after running the MATLAB code, this is the 3D point cloud that we get. And it's just gonna show a brief rotation. Of the statue. So again, you can kind of make out his general shape right here. And I'm going to let it finish rotating the figure. And interestingly enough, there is a single dot out here. I guess a little bit of noise in the scan, but overall the scan looks pretty solid in terms of noise. Initially, I had a lot of points like down here or up here because of all the noise that I was talking about that I had to crop out initially. But after doing that, I think I got a pretty good rendering of it, and I'll pull up the image to compare after it's done rotating. And again, the main focus ended up being getting the Jim Henson statue. I think with with other angles and additional scans, I'll be able to get Kermit and other features of the statue, so it all comes together really well in a 360 view. So it creates three figures here. Computer's being a little bit slow. So my favorite figure out of them all is this figure. I think it shows very well what the statue looks like. So here you can make out the general feature of the statue. So here's like the bench and the lower parts of the bench and then the ground. You can kind of see a general view of how his legs are crossed right here, and then his waist, torso, and then his arm. You can kind of see it reaching across, and then you can see his head. So what I'm going to do is actually pull up the image to compare. Have it in my files. So yeah, right here. So as you can see, if I can get the 3D point cloud next to it. So overall, this ended up, I think, turning out pretty well in terms of getting the initial front scan of Jim Henson himself. As you can see here, with his legs crossed and then his torso, and you can see a little bit of his arm reaching up. And here's the bench, parts of the bench right here. And then here's a scan of his head. And again, I think as I get other scans, I'll be able to then pull them all together. So I get more of the bench over here, and I get Kermit and more of his facial structure and more of his legs, maybe by getting it from this angle. And then I think I'll also be able to get his arm from coming at it more of this angle. And then finally, I'll scan from the side to get all of that in the back. But I think this is a pretty good initial scan that really shows the general shape of Jim Henson. So yeah, that was my process for transferring this to a 3D cloud.